The Mirrors That Remember. The accident. Emma Harris had always been an ordinary girl from an ordinary town. At 24, she worked as a florist in a small shop, cherished the quiet of her little apartment, and spent her evenings curled up with a book. Life was unremarkable but comfortable, until the accident. It happened on a rainy November night. The storm had rolled in fast, and the slick roads were a death trap. Emma's old sedan skidded out of control on a sharp turn, slamming into a tree. The world blurred into shattered glass and screams. When she woke up in the hospital, days had passed. She was alive, but something felt off. The doctors said it was normal after trauma, confusion, disorientation, and a strange detachment from reality. But as Emma returned home, the feeling of wrongness deepened, creeping into every corner of her mind. The first time she noticed something strange, it was subtle. She was brushing her hair in front of the bathroom mirror when her reflection hesitated. Just for a moment. Her hand paused mid-stroke, but the mirrored version didn't follow immediately. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. But when she blinked, the reflection was perfectly normal again. A life of its own days turned into weeks, but the feeling of unease only grew. Emma started avoiding mirrors, but they were everywhere. Bathroom cabinets, storefronts, even puddles on the street. She couldn't escape the sense that her reflection was always watching her, not just mimicking her movements, but thinking. Then the anomalies became undeniable. One night, as she prepared for bed, Emma glanced at the mirror in her bedroom. Her reflection was smiling. She wasn't. The grin was eerie, too wide, too knowing. Emma stumbled back, her heart hammering. She turned away, refusing to look, but when she dared to glance again, the smile was gone, replaced by her own frightened expression. She tried to rationalize it. It's stress, she told herself. Just stress and trauma. But deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. Messages from the other side. The mirrors started showing more than just strange behavior. Emma began to see things, flashes of places she'd never been, people she didn't know. The reflection in the hallway mirror showed her standing in a sunlit field, surrounded by children laughing and playing. But Emma had never been there. She lived alone and had no children. Another time, she saw a dark room filled with antique furniture, its walls covered in crimson wallpaper. In the reflection, she was sitting at a grand piano, her fingers gliding across the keys. But Emma didn't know how to play. The visions were vivid, almost tangible. They felt like memories, but not her own. One night, as she stared into the bathroom mirror, desperate for answers, her reflection spoke. "Do you remember?" it asked, its voice soft but clear. Emma screamed, stumbling back. The reflection didn't move this time. It simply stared at her with an expression of quiet sadness. "Remember what?" she whispered, trembling. But the reflection offered no reply. The forgotten life. Emma became obsessed. She spent hours in front of the mirrors, trying to make the reflection speak again, but it remained silent. Instead, the visions intensified. She saw a wedding, her reflection standing in a white gown, holding the hand of a man Emma had never seen before. She saw a nursery filled with toys, a small child reaching up to her with chubby hands. Fragments of a life that wasn't hers flooded her mind. Desperate, she began researching phenomena related to mirrors and memory. She stumbled upon obscure folklore that claimed mirrors were gateways to other worlds, reflections of lives that might have been, or lives forgotten. Her search led her to an old antique store on the edge of town. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Wilkins, seemed to know more than she let on. "You've seen them, haven't you?" Mrs. Wilkins asked, her voice a rasp. "The memories." Emma nodded, her hands trembling. "Mirrors don't just reflect," the woman continued. "They remember. They hold the lives we've lived before, the things we've lost." Emma's blood ran cold. Could it be true? Was she seeing a past life? The truth revealed. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma bought an ornate, full-length mirror from Mrs. Wilkins. A mirror the old woman claimed was special. "You'll find your answers," Mrs. Wilkins said cryptically as Emma left. That night, Emma placed the mirror in her bedroom and sat before it, staring into its depths. "Show me," she whispered. The surface rippled like water, and Emma was pulled into a vision so vivid it felt real. She was in a grand house surrounded by opulence. She saw herself, dressed in 19th century clothing, holding a child in her arms. A man, her husband, stood beside her, his face loving but shadowed with worry. The vision shifted. Fire. Screams. The house was ablaze. Emma saw herself trying to escape, clutching the child, but the flames consumed them both. She gasped, jerking back to the present. Tears streamed down her face as the truth hit her like a tidal wave. These weren't just memories. They were hers. She had lived this life before, and the mirrors had remembered. The final confrontation. Emma's reflection spoke again that night, her voice filled with sorrow. "You forgot us," it said. "You left us behind." "I didn't mean to," Emma sobbed. "I didn't know." Her reflection reached out, and for the first time, Emma felt her touch, cold and electric. The reflection smiled, not with malice, but with a strange kind of peace. "You can let go now," it whispered. The next morning, Emma awoke to find the mirrors shattered, but the strange visions were gone, and her reflection was normal once more. For the first time in months, she felt free. But sometimes, late at night, Emma swore she could still hear faint whispers coming from the shards of the broken mirror, like echoes of a lifelong past. Although Emma thought her ordeal was over, she soon discovered that the shattered mirror had left a mark on her and on her world. It started subtly, just like before. Shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't, and once, while walking past a shop window, she saw something flicker in her reflection. A woman holding a child. Determined to move forward, Emma avoided mirrors altogether, even covering the reflective surfaces in her home. But one evening, as she stood in her kitchen washing dishes, she noticed the faint outline of her reflection in the window above the sink. Her heart froze as the image didn't match her movements. The woman in the glass was not her. She wore the 19th century gown from Emma's vision, her face gaunt and pale. In her arms, she cradled a child wrapped in a soot-stained blanket. The woman stared at Emma with pleading eyes, her lips forming silent words Emma couldn't hear. Panicking, Emma turned away, but when she glanced back, the figure was gone. That night, she dreamed of fire again, its roar deafening, its heat unbearable. In her dream, she wasn't running. She was standing still, watching the flames consume everything around her. Beside her was the woman from the mirror, her gaze hollow and accusing. "You didn't save us," the woman whispered. Emma jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The forgotten souls, unable to ignore the visions. Emma returned to Mrs. Wilkins' antique shop the next day. The old woman greeted her with a knowing look. "You saw them, didn't you?" Mrs. Wilkins asked, her voice like gravel. Emma nodded, her throat dry. "Why won't they leave me alone?" Mrs. Wilkins sighed. "Because they're not just memories, they're trapped souls. Your mirror wasn't just a reflection of your past, it was a bridge. And when you shattered it, you didn't set them free. You just broke their connection to you." Emma's stomach churned. "What do I do?" The old woman hesitated before reaching under the counter and pulling out a small, dust-covered book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes and diagrams, their meanings cryptic. "This will guide you," Mrs. Wilkins said. "But be warned, it's dangerous to meddle with what's already been disturbed." Into the flames back home, Emma pored over the book late into the night. The instructions were convoluted, but one passage stood out. To release the tethered souls, one must return to the source of the memory. Emma's mind raced. The vision of the burning house wasn't just a figment of her imagination. It was a real place. Somewhere out there, the remains of that life still existed. After days of research, Emma finally found it. A crumbling estate in a nearby county, abandoned and rumored to be haunted. The house was almost unrecognizable, overgrown with weeds and half collapsed. But the crimson wallpaper from her visions was still visible beneath the peeling plaster. Inside, the air was thick with decay and silence. Emma felt as if she were being watched, and every step echoed like a thunderclap. In the parlor, she found the grand piano from her vision, its keys cracked and yellowed. The moment she touched it, the room shifted. The fire was back, roaring to life around her. Smoke choked her lungs as the wails of the trapped souls filled the air. She saw the woman again, standing in the flames with the child in her arms. "Help us!" the woman cried, her voice a piercing scream. Emma didn't know what to do. Desperately,